We'll jump into today's episode right after this announcement. For over 13 years, something remarkable has been happening. Rural hospitals and other small healthcare organizations that have partnered with Capstone have been achieving results and forming workplace cultures that even we are blown away by. It is truly a game changer when rural hospitals are the provider of choice and employer of choice so they can keep care local and margins strong. Far more healthcare organizations need to experience what's possible. That's why we're stepping forward in a bigger way, expanding our team of experts, expanding our capabilities by adding a strategic planning division to expand our ability to help even more rural hospitals and other healthcare organizations in 2026 and beyond. Capstone will continue to be the partner that small healthcare organizations can count on to meet them where they're at and guide them towards a stronger future. You can learn more at capstoneleadership.net. Where are we going to focus, if anywhere, our time and energy on rural health transformation initiatives, and which ones, if any, are right for us right now? And so this is really, a zoom out moment as well. If every rural hospital shifts energy away from their top strategic priorities to chase these external and state or national priorities, what happens to the actual needs of their communities? And as I mentioned, we risk solving funded problems instead of the real priority problems of our community that align with our mission, our people, our community.
Welcome to Culture Change RX, the podcast for healthcare professionals that are committed to creating a thriving workplace culture, improving the experiences of employees and patients, and ultimately unlocking their organization's next level of potential. I'm Sue Tetzlaff, your host and co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions. Join me and my insightful guests each week as we share actionable insights for navigating the crucial people side of the business of healthcare. Subscribe now for a weekly dose of Culture Change RX. Now let's dive into this week's conversation where culture change takes center stage.
Hey, glad you're here for another episode of Culture Change RX. It is me, Sue Tetzlaff, co-founder of Capstone Leadership Solutions, and also the host of this podcast, Culture Change RX. Today is one of those solo episodes where we call it a culture bite. So it's just me here in the studio with you today. And the focus of today's culture bite is rural health transformation strategy. And, wearing my strategy hat more than 30 plus years serving as a strategist in a community hospital setting, but also now the last 14 years serving as a strategist for dozens of healthcare transformations, mainly critical access hospital transformations, is that what I'm seeing, with that strategist hat on, is that rural health transformation, this 5-year initiative, $50 billion, is that it is creating both opportunity and distraction risk. And I just wanted to call that out today because it's really coming out in the conversations that I'm having with healthcare executive teams and boards and trustees when they contemplate this rural health transformation opportunity. And so really what I want to say is that not every opportunity is strategic. And right now, rural hospitals are being flooded with these opportunities, right? And so the question isn't, should we participate in rural health transformation? The question is, what happens if you lose your strategy in the process? I look back to my own healthcare experience in a community hospital and being part of leading the efforts to create very clear strategy to guide improvement and growth of our community hospital, really defined by the needs of our community, right? So it is very community need focused. And oftentimes, as we design those strategies, we might find that when it comes to the how do we achieve those strategies? So that's the execution part. We may look out for the funding, the resources, the approaches we want to use or need to use to achieve those strategies. So the strategy comes first, the defined need that's prioritized come first. Then we go out and say, how are we going to do that? And how are we going to fund that? And do we need help internally or externally to align, the experts to make that happen? And so I can think of a time in my own hospital experience where an example is that we had a top strategic priority to improve quality in our intensive care. We were a community hospital, we had a small intensive care, and we had a high transfer rate of patients out of our hospital, and that created a low census in our ICU. But we were adding more experts such as critical care specialists, pulmonologists, cardiologists, etc. And so we had a big strategy around being able to decrease the transfer of our patients to tertiary hospitals an hour and a half, 3 hours away, and keep their care local, and definitely that it was high quality. And so we participated in a multi-organization initiative through the State Hospital Association. Keystone ICU was the term we used for the initiative to decrease mortality and morbidity in our ICU. So this initiative, Keystone ICU, that was a multi-organizational initiative in our state, aligned with a strategy we already had. It helped us achieve that strategy. So there was a match, right? There was a match between our strategies, what we were prioritized doing, and the resources and the initiative being organized at a multi-organizational level. So these models can work. And I'm a big proponent of multi-organization initiatives and collaboratives, sharing and collaborating across organizations and with experts. We can often achieve more, go faster when it's organized in that kind of way. But what we're seeing right now is different in scale, speed, and pressure, right? So let's frame the moment here that we are in rural healthcare, and that is a $50 billion level of energy and momentum, state level organizing, multi organizational collaboratives and efforts being formed quickly, funding tied to participation in these efforts. And you're probably most familiar what's going on in your specific state, but in most states, it is, really being promoted that these multi-organization efforts are kind of what's preferred in the approach to the spending of these dollars and the transformation that is intended to be created on the other side of the investment of these dollars and this time and energy. But, this isn't just about collaboration. This is about gravitational pull, right? And so there's really a couple of dangers here that I just want to just put out there in the world. And maybe you've been thinking about this. I know that some CEOs that I've been talking to, some executives and trustees that I've been talking to, they've been talking some flavor of this. They've been sensing some flavor of this, but I'm just going to pull the elephant out of the room if it hasn't been so directly stated, is that there's some core risks or dangers when it comes to the strategy of healthcare organizations right now with the expansiveness of the scale, speed, and pressure created by the rural health transformation efforts. And so one of those risks or dangers to individual healthcare organizations is what I'll call strategy creep, right? So we've already set our strategic plan, and we've clearly taken the time and energy and effort to say these are the top strategic priorities for our organization. But now we've got, this opportunity through rural health transformation and all of the speed and pressure and timeline around that. And so we just default to saying, we just added on, right? So we got our plan and we've right sized that plan for our resources, for our capabilities, for our execution systems and abilities. But now we just add this on or layer this on. So I would call that strategy creep. So more initiative layered on top of your existing plan. Pausing here to get healthcare executives excited about Capstone's 14th annual Healthcare Executive Forum. Many small and rural healthcare organizations are operating under conditions that naturally strain margins, workforce stability, and long term competitiveness. Strength today requires more than perseverance, it requires intentional design and doing. And that's why the focus of our Healthcare Executive Forum this year is on designing the future. It's all about where strategic clarity meets execution certainty. This isn't just another conference or networking event. This is where rural healthcare executives learn how to lead their organizations to true organizational vitality. If your plan or your ability to execute it is in question, if progress feels incremental instead of transformational, it may be time for a trajectory changing strategic period. Be a leader in rural healthcare's new era, the era of organizational vitality. Register now and bring your executive team. It is true that the next 3 years may be the most defining period your organization has faced in decades. Visit capstoneleadership.net and click on upcoming events. See you in June in Madison. So then your people are stretched thinner across all of your strategies. And there's a high potential there that execution quality will drop and overwhelm will increase. And so this really violates in one of our disciplines to narrow the focus and get very highly aligned in your organization, your people, your resources, very highly aligned to a narrow focus of top strategic priorities. So we can go all in and big and be highly aligned on the most important strategic priorities so that we're not going millimeters towards many things, but miles towards the most important things. And what we found doing this with dozens of organizations over the last 14 plus years is that there's almost this ripple effect of going all in on the most important things and then figuring out again, how do we resource, how do we execute on those most important things, is that when we do that, there's this ripple of impact. So we might improve this one thing in a very big way. And we realize on the other side of that, well, 7 other things got better because we did that. There's a positive ripple effect. And that's what's really exciting to see when organizations really narrow the focus, go all in, go miles towards the most important things. But we can't do that, right? If we're just layering on more initiatives on top of our already clearly defined top strategic priorities. So strategy creep and the risk of execution quality dropping, people stretched thinner, overwhelm, maybe a bigger risk, is that this is one of the core dangers or risks if as we approach what's going on in our individual states in the area of rural health transformation opportunities. And then the other risk is what we call strategy swap. And it really is about we follow the money, right? So existing strategic plan gets sidelined and we swap out our well laid plans that were clearly intended to meet the top priority needs of our organization and its community that is served. And now we sideline that. And we're not sidelining that for a year or two here, people. This is a 5-year plus long-term sustainability initiative, rural health transformation. So we're not just sidelining it for a quarter or two or a single execution period of a year. We may be sidelining our strategic plans for a substantial period of time. And so then the rural health transformation initiatives that have been decided outside of our strategic planning process, right, becomes our strategy. And so then, in my mind, what that means is that our community needs, our top community needs become secondary to the available funding streams and the available initiatives that are out there right now. And I actually 30 plus years ago, when I was getting my master's degree in healthcare administration from the University of Minnesota, a lot of our classes were with students that were in the public health program. So they were getting a master's in public health. I was getting a master's in hospital and healthcare administration. And so we had some joint classes together. So I was hanging around with some of these public health peeps. And so I started really kind of watching in my own community what was going on in public health. I had never worked in public health, but now I was sitting shoulder to shoulder with these public health students and also having professors that had that kind of background and experience. And so I started watching it, and I was kind of puzzled by it in my own community and perspective. One of the first things that I saw, and I don't want to say that this is true in public health, and I'm not dishing public health, but I'm just bringing up an example that is very parallel to what I see is now in front of us in healthcare administration. And it's this risk. And we can decide very intentionally to do this or not do this and engage in this risk. But what the risk is, or the enticement or the dangle is that, again, we follow the money stream and our strategies are defined by what is funded. And an example of that in my own experience, like I mentioned many years ago, was that our local public health agency was doing a big community initiative around screening for colon cancer. And as a nurse, as a clinician, as a person that, cares about cancer and people having early detection for all kinds of cancer, this was a huge, huge initiative. It was loud, it was big, there were so many activities around this in our community. But it puzzled me. It really puzzled me because as a healthcare organization, a hospital in the community, when we had done our strategic planning and we had looked at, cardiac disease, pulmonary disease, cancer, other incidences of healthcare concerns, top healthcare needs of our community, what we saw in the data was that colon cancer actually was a pretty low incidence in our community. And there were 3 other cancers actually that were the big 3 in our community. And colon cancer wasn't on that list. And our local public health agency had no big campaigns, initiatives going on around these big 3 cancers in our community: prevention, early detection, warning signs, da, 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 da. There was none of that going on. And so I remember inquiring because I was just so curious. I'm like, can you tell me when are you going to tackle these top 3, or should we as a hospital tackle these top 3? And what I learned from our public health officials was that was what was being funded at the state and national level was colon cancer screening and detection. And so their top strategic priority was based on not our top community need, but was based on what funding was available at a larger state or national level, not at a local level. So I think there's an analogy here. There's a risk here around us possibly as healthcare executives of making a similar decision. Is the funding is available for X, so now this becomes our top strategic priority and emphasis, and where we spend our time and energy and create impact, when it may not necessarily be the top need of our community, but it is funded. And so that is a strategy swap example where instead of doing a top strategic need, number 1, 2, or 3 cancer, we do a lower need because that is what is funded. And that would be, I'm thinking about the long-term play of this, right? Is, what's the long-term risk of this if all small and rural healthcare organizations do this strategy swap and we parking lot our top strategic needs and efforts so that we don't miss out on these funds that are available maybe for some lower priority, less impactful efforts in our community. So let's just say it out loud, right? This is FOMO, right? This is the fear of missing out. So, these are the kind of things and conversations that are happening at the executive and boardroom level is what if we miss out? What if others get ahead? Executives saying, what would our board think if we pass by these opportunities to be involved and receive funds for X, even though it's not currently defined as a top strategic priority or a top need in our community? And are we being irresponsible if we don't get involved, if we don't engage in this, and if we don't pursue this? So, really, I always like to say hope is not a strategy, but now I'm also saying fear of missing out, FOMO, is not a strategy. It is a reaction, right? So there's a lot of strategic tension out there right now when it comes to what do we do with this? What are we going to do? Where are we going to focus, if anywhere, our time and energy on rural health transformation initiatives, and which ones, if any, are right for us right now? And so this is really, a zoom out moment as well. If every rural hospital shifts energy away from their top strategic priorities to chase these external and state or national priorities, what happens to the actual needs of their communities? And as I mentioned, we risk solving funded problems instead of the real priority problems of our community that align with our mission, our people, our community. So, money can accelerate strategy for sure. But my point here is it should never define it. It is a end to a means, and we should determine first, what are our strategies, and then determine how do we execute them. And definitely, if there is alignment with, or if we can create a rural health transformation grant or proposal that is in keeping with that, or if we can link up to a rural health transformation proposal that is in alignment or in keeping with that as the how, not the what, but the how of achieving an already defined top strategic priority, then it's the right thing to pursue. I wanted to give, from my strategist hat here, maybe some practical guidance or some ways to almost have a decision filter for what to say yes to or how to decide about a rural health transformation initiative that's being organized on a multi-organizational level. The first question is, and you probably can guess this one from what I've already said already, is does this directly advance one of our top 3 strategic priorities, or even any of our top strategic priorities that is already defined on our short-term strategic plan? So having a year or whatever it is strategic plan and having it already be on that plan. So does this directly advance one of our top strategic priorities on our plan? And if not, that's a red flag that we might be, at risk for strategy creep or a strategy swap. And then what are we going to stop or deprioritize to make room for this if we did already commit or say yes to being engaged in a multi-organizational rural health transformation opportunity? And so if the answer is nothing, we didn't swap out anything, then you really are deciding to engage in strategy creep. And likely this is going to have an impact on your leaders and your team. And it's likely going to have an impact on your progress and your chance of success for each of the things that are now on this expanded list of strategic priorities, because now we have more things that are defined as top strategic priorities. And you've probably heard this quote before, is that when you have too many priorities, you basically have none. And so the question here, number two, is what are we stopping or deprioritizing to make room for this if we're committing to be engaged in something else that wasn't on our plan? And then number three, do we have the execution systems and capacity to do all of this well? And if not, you might just be setting your organization up for failure, not progress, improvement, and success. And so, if it doesn't fit your strategy, consider, does it deserve your capacity, your attention, or is it just extra and maybe even the straw that breaks the camel's back? So, really, we could paint the picture of two possible futures, possible approaches maybe of how organizations consider the rural health transformation initiatives that are forming all around them. One is those organizations that choose the path of really being selective in their participation. So, really being strategically grounded organizations to say, we've decided our strategies. Now we're going to be selective in participating and linking up to these rural health transformation initiatives that truly align with our strategies and our community and organization and needs. And that's going to be our place of decision making, is staying very strategically grounded. But on the other side of that, I guess the extreme opposite side of that is organizations that link up to everything. If it's out there, we're going to link up with it. We're not going to miss out. And we're just going to add it on and we're going to figure out how to make it happen. If that means we're going to have to maybe have huge lists of strategic priorities and take the risk of burning out teams and having some overwhelm possibly. So, rural health transformation is truly a once in a generation opportunity. I've been in healthcare leadership for a total of about 34 years now, and I've never seen anything like this. And truly, only if it strengthens our strategy, not replaces it or expands it, is it a point of being a favorable thing for our community healthcare organizations. And so even though, this is a once in a generation opportunity, this isn't the only time when healthcare organizations have been at risk of strategies creep or strategy swap. But in my mind, in my observation, those rural healthcare organizations that are going to be the strongest on the other side of this are the ones who don't chase each and every opportunity, but they're the ones who stay most clear and committed to their top strategic priorities and seeking rural health opportunities, if they exist and if they're available to them, that help them in the execution and the achievement of those top strategic priorities. So if you're navigating rural health transformation decisions right now and want a strategic sounding board, let's talk. I've been having a lot of these conversations, and it truly is just talk. It is a conversation where maybe you're a CEO or a chief strategy officer for a small rural healthcare organization that is going through these decisions right now, or a trustee of one of these organizations right now, and you're thinking about some of this stuff yourself and you're unsure about maybe where your organization should go with this. And if, I'm a great sounding board for that. I'm a great listener regarding that. Happy to take the time to do that. And it really keeps me close to what's going on in the boardrooms and the executive rooms as far as what's happening right now, as far as strategy, commitment, and alignment and decision making around rural health transformation. So maybe before your next rural health transformation meeting or any sort of conversation where this might be coming up in your organization, this is the big question to ask is, are we leading our strategy or letting funding lead us? And We do hope that you're an organization that can find the perfect match for your top strategic priorities that align with the top needs of your community, and that there's some health transformation, multi-organization initiatives, or individual opportunities for your hospitals to seek funding to actually execute what is already top priority where you are. So in the show notes, I'll put those 3 questions to ask, those practical guidance questions or RHT decision filter questions that I mentioned in the episode. I'll pop them in there as a separate point where you could maybe grab those and be reminded of those and use those day to day, not just over the weeks ahead, but maybe even over the next 4 or 5 years ahead as your organization is faced with these big decisions in your state and in your hospital. So thanks again for tuning in to this week's episode of Culture Change RX. And as always, we'll be back each Wednesday with another episode. And if you found this episode helpful or insightful, please take the time to share with others in your organization or in your network of colleagues that are facing the same questions and making similar decisions where they are. Appreciate it very much and look forward to being back with you again next week. Bye now.
Thanks for tuning in to Culture Change RX. If you found value in today's episode and you are a believer in fostering change in healthcare, join us in making a difference. Follow, rate, and review our podcast on your favorite platform. Share it with colleagues and your network. Together, we can make a lasting impact. Until next week, keep inspiring positive change.